My husband made me sign away our marriage in a room full of strangers, and somehow I was still the one being treated like the scandal. The courthouse in downtown Boston smelled like old paper, cold coffee, and expensive decisions. He stood at the end of the long table with my hands locked so tightly my fingers hurt, staring at the divorce papers that would erase 5 years of my life in one clean stroke. Then Ethan Calloway walked in with Adriana Vale on one side and his board attorney on the other, and the air left my lungs so fast it felt like humiliation had a sound. "You brought her?" he asked before I could stop myself. Ethan did not even blink. "This ends faster if everyone stays professional." Professional. That word hit harder than anger. I looked at the woman beside him, polished and perfect, the one every finance magazine already treated like his future, and felt my face burn. The attorney slid the settlement packet toward me and spoke in that smooth legal voice that made cruelty sound reasonable. When I saw Gwen's name, my chest locked. My brother. If I contested the divorce or broke the non-disclosure agreement, the company could reopen the internal leak case and drag him into court. "You said this was over," I whispered. Ethan's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed cold. "Sign it, Claire. This is the only way to protect him." Protect him. He almost laughed. It sounded noble until you looked at what he was really asking. Sacrifice yourself quietly, and maybe the man with money would spare your family. I lifted my eyes to Ethan's face and searched it for one thing. Doubt. Regret. Love. Anything. "Did you ever believe me?" he asked. His silence hurt more than a lie. Then he said, "I am choosing the solution that does the least damage." Something inside me went still. So I took the pen. My hand shook once. "You are not protecting me," I said softly. "You are protecting your empire from me." Then I signed. The sound of paper sliding across polished wood felt final in a way vows never had. He pushed the pen back toward him, stood, and walked past him before my tears could humiliate me a second time. But just as I reached the courthouse doors, I heard his attorney say Gwen's name again, followed by 4 words that stopped me cold. "There is one more condition." The one more condition was simple. He had to disappear. By sunset, I was in the back seat of a Gwen's beat-up truck, watching Boston fall behind me in gray glass and winter light, trying not to choke on the fact that my marriage had ended before lunch. Owen kept both hands on the wheel like he was afraid one wrong move would break me further. "You do not have to do this alone," he said quietly. He turned toward the window. "That is funny, considering I just signed papers proving I do." The words came out sharper than I meant them to, but the pain underneath was worse. My phone stayed dark. No text from Ethan. No call. Not even one cowardly line pretending this had hurt him too. By the time the skyline disappeared, I understood what the condition really meant. Silence was not enough. They wanted me gone. When we crossed out of Boston, I looked back once through the rear window and watched the city shrink into something distant and untouchable. 5 years of marriage, erased before dinner. I told myself not to cry. Then I saw the courthouse envelope still sitting beside me on the seat, Ethan's signature buried somewhere inside it, and turned my face back toward the glass. By the time Owen said we were nearly there, I had already made one decision. If they wanted me to vanish, they were going to have to watch me survive first. The ocean hit first. Cold. Wide. Merciless. Then came Willow Bay, all salt wind, gray sky, and the kind of quiet that made Boston feel like another life entirely. By the time Owen turned onto Harbor Lane, my head was pounding from exhaustion, anger, and the effort of holding myself together. My grandmother's lawyer was already waiting outside the house with a ring of brass keys and a tired smile. "Your grandmother left you the Seaview Inn," he said. "She believed you would know what to do with it." He almost laughed in his face. The inn stood 3 blocks from the water, weather-beaten and leaning, with peeling white paint and a front porch that looked one storm away from collapse. The windows were salt-stained. The railings sagged. The place had the stubborn look of something that had survived too much and was tired of proving it. "This is what she left me?" he asked. The lawyer glanced at me carefully. "No. She left you a chance." He did not want those words to land. They did anyway. Willow Bay had not forgotten me. By dinner, the cashier at the market tilted her head and said, "You are that Claire Bennett, right? The one who married the Calloway heir?" Married. Past tense would have been kinder. He forced a smile, paid for coffee and cleaning supplies, and walked back to the inn with my spine locked straight. He was not going to cry in public. Not here. Not on day one. Inside, I set the grocery bag on a dusty counter and looked around at warped floors, faded wallpaper, and 1,000 expensive problems I could not afford. Owen stepped beside me. "We can sell it." He shook my head before he finished. "No, I already lost one home today." The words surprised both of us. Maybe because they were true. The Seaview was a wreck, but it was mine. Not Ethan's. Not his attorney's. Not his mother's. Mine. A knock sounded against the open front door. He turned and found a tall man in a work jacket standing there, tool belt low on his hips, sea wind at his back. It took one look at the porch, then at me. "You are going to need help with that foundation," he said. "Name is Noah Carter. Your lawyer called me on the way over. Said you might want a real estimate before the first storm makes decisions for you." That made more sense than fate, which I appreciated. He tightened my grip on the keys. "Tell me the truth. How much of this place is about to fall apart?" It glanced past me into the lobby, then up toward the ceiling line. "Depends how attached you are to optimism." By the next afternoon, I had a list of everything the inn needed and exactly zero idea how I was going to pay for it. Noah stood in the lobby with a pencil behind his ear, reading off numbers that made my stomach tighten. Foundation work. Porch supports. Half the windows. Minimum 40 grand if you want this place standing through winter. He let out a slow breath and looked at the warped floorboards under my feet. $40,000 might as well have been 40 million. Still, I lifted my chin. Then I guess I'm learning how to do impossible things on a discount. One corner of Noah's mouth moved. That is one way to say it. For a moment, the future looked brutally simple. He was broke. The inn was breaking around me. And if I wanted a life that belonged to me, I was going to have to build it with whatever courage I had left. Then Noah walked in from town holding a folded flyer and looking sick. "Claire," he said carefully, "you need to see this." He took the paper from him and felt my stomach drop the second I opened it. Callaway Development Waterfront Renewal Community Vision Meeting. Ethan's name was printed across the bottom in cold, polished letters. For one awful beat, my heart recognized him before the rest of me remembered better. Willow Bay. Of course. Of course he would find his way into the one place I had left and call it progress. "He cannot be here for me," I said, even though the words sounded thin the second they left my mouth. Owen did not answer. It did not have to. That night, I stood in the back of the town meeting with my coat still damp from sea mist and watched Ethan Calloway address the room like he belonged to every inch of it. Dark suit. Calm voice. Perfect control. He spoke about revitalization, hopes, tourism, and long-term growth while half the room nodded like he had arrived carrying salvation instead of a development plan. Then a map lit up on the screen behind him. Neat lines. Clear color blocks. Survey markers. Proposed routes. And there it was. My inn. The Seaview sat in the center of a shaded redevelopment zone. My blood went cold. This was not a coincidence. It was a target. He should have left right then. Instead I stayed until Ethan's gaze lifted from the crowd and landed on me. Just for a second. Just long enough to make the room fall away. Then he kept speaking. As if he had not once sworn to protect me before handing me divorce papers. As if I were just another local obstacle with a deed and an inconvenient address. After the meeting, his assistant stopped me near the exit. Mr. Calloway would like a private word. He turned and found Ethan already walking toward me, the same unreadable face, the same devastating control. He stopped inches away and held out a sleek folder. "I made you a fair offer for the inn," he said. "Take it, Claire." He looked at the folder, then at the man who had already taken enough. "You do not get to buy what is left of me." His expression did not change. This is not about what is left, he said quietly. It is about what sits underneath your land. He did not take the folder. He did not take anything from Ethan anymore. Then say it plainly, I told him. You came to Willow Bay because my inn is in your way. His gaze stayed locked on mine, cool and steady, as if he were negotiating a contract instead of standing in the wreckage of our marriage. Your property sits over a shoreline access corridor the project needs. There it was. Plain. Direct. Ruthless. He should have felt surprised. Instead I felt tired. The kind of tired that settles into your bones after someone disappoints you exactly the way you always feared they would. Then reroute your project, I said. I am not selling. Something tightened in his jaw. It was not used to hearing no from me. That used to be my own fault. The next morning, refusal arrived wearing pearls. Victoria Calloway stepped onto the Seaview porch in a cream coat that probably cost more than my roof. She looked around the lobby with polite disgust, as if the peeling paint had personally offended her. Glide, she said, like my name was a clerical error. You always did mistake sentiment for strategy. He stood behind the dusty front desk and folded my arms. And you always mistake money for permission. Her smile thinned. She told me Ethan's project would transform Willow Bay. That my resistance would only make me look bitter. That respectable women knew when to step aside. Respectable women. He almost laughed. Then she slid a business card across the counter. Name your number. Leave town quietly. Stop embarrassing this family. He pushed the card back toward her. I stopped being your family the day your son asked me to sign away my life. Something cold flashed in her eyes before she tucked the card back into her bag. By afternoon, I was standing in town hall with a presentation board, a stack of numbers, and a pulse that would not settle. He had signed up to pitch my own plan for the Seaview. Small weddings. Weekend retreats. Local partnerships. A resort inn that would bring money into Willow Bay without gutting it. Something leaving, not just profitable. The room looked larger from the front than it had from the back the night before. My hands shook once. Then I started speaking. He walked them through floor plans, repair phases, projected revenue, seasonal traffic, and preservation incentives. Parking concerns. Storm codes. Local sourcing. He had answers for all of it. Half-watroke, I felt him before I saw him. Ethan, in the back row. Watching. Not interrupting. Not pressuring. Just watching while I laid out the kind of vision nobody in Boston had ever let me claim out loud. When I finished, the room stayed quiet for one sharp second before the questions started. Real questions. Sharp ones. He answered every single one. By the end, something in the room had shifted. They were no longer looking at me like Ethan Calloway's discarded wife. They were looking at me like I might actually know what I was doing. Outside, the salt wind hit cold across the courthouse steps. He had barely made it to the sidewalk when I found Ethan waiting near the rail. You should have let me see that years ago, he said. He tightened my hold on the proposal in my hand. See what? His eyes moved over my face with that unreadable intensity one used to mistake for safety. This version of you. The line landed harder than it should have. For a second, I hated how much part of me still wanted to believe it mattered. Then his phone lit up. I glanced down, and I saw the name before he silenced it. Adriana. Whatever had nearly softened in me went cold again. He stepped back. Go answer it. Glide, you are already late to the life you chose. He turned and walked away before he could say anything else. The next afternoon, Noah stood in the Seaview lobby reading through repair numbers while I pretended not to hear Ethan's voice in my head. Foundation work. Porch supports. Half the windows. Minimum 40 grand if you want this place standing through winter. $40,000. A hostile development project. A town full of people already whispering my last name like gossip. He should have been overwhelmed. Instead I felt angry enough to stay upright. Noah tapped his pencil against the page. If you want the truth, this place is stubborn. But it is still standing. I looked around at the warped floors, the salt-stained windows, the tired old bones of the inn. Sounds familiar. That earned me the smallest smile. Then Owen came in from town holding another folded flyer, his expression already warning me that whatever came next would be worse. Clyde, he said carefully, you need to see this. I took the paper from him and stared at the bold print across the front. Community Site Review Land Impact Survey Priority Parcel Holders Required to attend. My name was listed first. Beneath it, in clean corporate type, was Ethan Calloway. He kept reading until I reached the stamped line at the bottom. Attendance mandatory. No representatives allowed. I looked up at Owen, then at Noah, then back at the notice in my hand. Ethan was not just building near me. It was building around me. And whatever came next, he was making sure I would have to face it beside him. He did not sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan standing under the projector light at Town Hall, talking about revitalization while mine glowed on the screen behind him like a problem waiting to be solved. By morning, I was already angry enough to function. That was when Victoria Calloway arrived. She stepped onto the Seaview porch in a cream coat that probably cost more than my roof, pausing just long enough to glance down at the cracked boards before coming inside. The look on her face made it clear she considered the whole building an insult. Clyde, she said, as if my name were an administrative inconvenience. You always did mistake sentiment for strategy. He stood behind the dusty front desk and folded my arms. And you always mistake money for permission. Her smile thinned. She moved slowly through the lobby, taking in the peeling paint, the warped floorboards, the salt-stained windows. Though here, this place was not history or possibility. It was leverage with bad lighting. She told me Ethan's project would transform Willow Bay. That resisting would only make me look bitter. That respectable women knew when to step aside before they embarrassed themselves in public. Respectable women. He nearly laughed. Instead I watched her pull a business card from her bag and place it on the counter between us. Name your number, she said. Leave town quietly. Stop embarrassing this family. He looked at the card, then slid it back toward her. I stopped being your family the day your son asked me to sign away my life. For the first time, something colder than polish showed through her expression. You are confusing defiance with power, she said. No, I answered. I am finally learning the difference. She left with the card still in her hand and disappointment sharpened into contempt. By afternoon, I was standing in town hall with a proposal board, a stack of printed numbers, and a pulse that refused to settle. He had signed up to present my own plan for the Seaview. Small weddings. Weekend retreats. Local partnerships. A boutique in restored instead of erased. Something living, not just profitable. The room felt larger from the front than it ever had from the back. My hands shook once. Then I started. He walked them through phased repairs, seasonal occupancy, preservation incentives, parking flow, vendor partnerships, storm code requirements. He had spent half the night turning fear into spreadsheets and the other half reminding myself that no one in that room was more entitled to speak about my property than I was. Half watroke, I felt him before I saw him. Ethan. Back row. Watching. Not interrupting. Not stepping in, just listening while I laid out the kind of vision nobody in Boston had ever let me claim out loud. When I finished, the room stayed quiet for one hard second before the questions started. Real questions. Good questions. Expensive questions. He answered every one. And by the time it was over, the room had shifted. They were no longer looking at me like Ethan Calloway's discarded wife. They were looking at me like I might actually know what I was doing. Outside, the salt wind came off the harbor hard enough to sting. He had barely reached the courthouse steps when I found Ethan waiting near the rail. You should have shown me that years ago, he said. He tightened my hold on the proposal. Shown you what? His eyes moved over my face with the same unreadable intensity that had once felt like safety and now felt like unfinished damage. This version of you. The words landed harder than I wanted them to. Because some part of me, the foolish part that never died cleanly, still wanted them to matter. Then his phone lit up. I glanced down, and I saw the name before he silenced it. Adriana. Whatever softness had started to form inside me went cold at once. He stepped back. Go answer it. Clyde, you are already late to the life you chose. He walked away before he could say anything else, but his voice followed me halfway down the path. Not loud. Not desperate. Just enough to make me hate that I heard it. By the time I reached the Seaview, Noah was already in the lobby with a clipboard and another brutal list of repairs. Foundation work, he said. Porch supports. Alf the windows. Minimum 40 grand if you want this place standing through winter. He let out a slow breath. $40,000. A failing in. A redevelopment plan tightening around me one meeting at a time. He should have felt overwhelmed. Instead I felt angry enough to stay upright. Noah looked up from the page. If you want the truth, this place is stubborn. But it is still standing. I glanced around at the warped floorboards, the tired trim, the old bones holding on out of pure refusal. Sounds familiar. A gave me the smallest smile. Then Owen came in from town with another folded notice in his hand and the kind of expression that told me the day was not done with me yet. Clyde, he said carefully, you need to see this. I took the paper and read the heading once. Then again. Community Site Review Land Impact Survey Priority Parcel Holders Required to attend. My name was listed first. Under it, in clean corporate print, was Ethan Calloway. And stamped at the bottom, in a line too official to ignore, were the words that made my grip tighten. Attendance mandatory. No representatives allowed. He looked from the notice to Owen, then to Noah, then back to the page in my hand. Ethan was not just building near me. It was building around me. And he was making sure I would have to stand next to him while he did it. They called me a greedy ex-wife before I even reached the microphone. The zoning meeting was packed. Fishermen in worn jackets. Retirees with folded agendas. Business owners who suddenly cared a great deal about progress when Ethan Calloway's money was behind it. He stood near the front with my notes in one hand and my pulse pounding high in my throat. Then a man in the second row leaned back in his chair and said, loud enough for half the room to hear, maybe she just wants a bigger check from her billionaire ex. A few people laughed. Quiet. Sarp. Man. It climbed my neck so fast it felt like the room had tilted a spotlight directly at me. Before I could answer, another voice followed from somewhere behind him. Can you blame her? She married into money once. Maybe she's trying to do it twice. That one landed lower. Dirty. The whispers started immediately after that. Boston. Divorce. Owen. The old scandal moved through the room like everyone had been waiting for permission to enjoy it. He gripped the edge of my notes hard enough to wrinkle the paper. I'm here to talk about zoning, I said. Not my divorce. My point exactly, someone muttered. Hard to separate the two when the land sits under Calloway's project. The chairman cleared his throat, but too softly. No one in the room was especially eager to protect me from a story they already liked. Then Ethan stood. Not slowly. Not dramatically. Just one hard movement that changed the air. Enough. Didn't they raise his voice? Didn't they need to? Every head turned. His stare went first to the man in the second row, then across the rest of the room, cold enough to cut through every half-smile and whispered aside. You can question permits, he said. You can question code. But if one more person in this room attacks Claire Bennett's character because you think money makes slander acceptable, you answer to me. Silence fell so fast it almost rang. The chairman found his spine again, called the meeting back to order, and suddenly everyone remembered how to behave. He hated what my body did with Ethan's voice. Hated that some damaged part of me still recognized protection even when it arrived years too late. The rest of the session moved quickly after that. Questions returned to boundaries, access roads, erosion control, and the long ugly mechanics of deciding whose future counted more on paper. By the time it ended, my hands were steady again. My chest wasn't. Old see the wind off the harbor cut between us as I came down the courthouse steps and found Ethan waiting. Do not do that again, I said. Fronid. Do what? He gave a short, humorless laugh. Step in like you still have the right to protect me. His gaze sharpened. Someone had to. The answer hurt more than I wanted it to. Because for one humiliating second in that room, I had wanted him to. He turned to leave. Clyde. He stopped, but I didn't face him. What now? There was a pause long enough to make me regret stopping at all. Then he said, come by the inn tonight. There is something you need to see before the storm hits. He looked up at the sky. The clouds over Willow Bay had already gone dark and low, the kind that made the whole shoreline feel braced for impact. Whatever I expected from Ethan, it wasn't a warning. He didn't answer. He just kept walking. By the time I reached Harbor Lane, the wind had picked up hard enough to rattle the loose porch rail. The old gutters shattered. Somewhere along the east side of the inn, a board knocked once, then again. Noah's estimate came back to me in pieces. Foundation. Porch supports. Windows. Winter. He stood on the porch for a long moment with my keys in my hand and looked up at the darkening sky. Maybe Ethan had been manipulating me. Maybe he had simply seen what I was too angry to notice. Either way, the storm was real. When the first cold drop hit the back of my hand, I made my decision. If Ethan Calloway wanted one more night telling me what was broken, he was going to say it while helping me keep the place standing. He almost expected him not to be there. That would have been easier. But by the time I reached the Seaview porch, Ethan was already crouched near the front steps with his jacket off, sleeves rolled, a flashlight in one hand and a stack of sandbags at his feet. Rain had just started to come down in a thin gray sheet, and the wind off the bay was picking up fast. I looked up once. The drainage on the east side is worse than it looked. No apology. No charm. Just the problem. He set my bag down inside the door. Then stopped talking and helped me fix it. That was how it started. No speeches. No negotiations. Just both of us moving before either one could turn it into a fight. I held the beam while he checked the crawlspace vents. I braced the porch rail while I dragged old planters out of the runoff path. We hauled sandbags through rising rain, shouted over the wind, and worked around each other with the kind of battered instinct that only comes from once having built a life together. At some point he glanced through the open door, noticed the flashlight, first aid kit, and extra batteries already lined up on the hall table, and said, "You still overpack for bad weather." He shot him a look. "And you still think noticing things earns you forgiveness?" Something almost like a smile touched his mouth, then disappeared. The power flickered once. Then again. By the third flash, we both gave up pretending we could keep working blind and went inside to catch our breath while thunder rolled over the harbor. He handed him a towel without thinking. It took it like it meant more than cotton had any right to mean. "You always made tea during storms," he said. He hated that he remembered. He hated more that I did too. Still, I went into the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the stove while the rain battered the windows hard enough to rattle the panes. We stood in my grandmother's kitchen with chipped counters, dim light, and seawater drying at the edges of our sleeves. For one brief, treacherous stretch of silence, it felt less like exile and more like an older life had wandered into the room by mistake. He took a sip and looked at me over the rim of the mug. "You still put in too much honey. You still drink it anyway." The answer came out before I could stop it. I lowered the mug slowly. The quiet between us changed shape. He set mine down too hard. "Why did you really come, Ethan?" He didn't pretend not to understand. "For the project," he said first, and I nearly turned away. Then his voice dropped. "And because walking out of that courthouse was the first time in my life I realized I had made a mistake I couldn't take control." My pulse stumbled. There it was. Not an apology. Not a defense. Something worse than both. Almost honesty. Rain streaked the windows behind him in silver lines. The whole house seemed to lean in around us, listening. He should have asked what mistake he meant. The divorce. The silence. Me. Instead I just looked at him and felt anger tangle with memory until I couldn't separate one from the other. Thin headlights swept across the front windows. A car door slammed outside. He stepped toward the lobby just as the front door opened and Adriana Vale walked in wearing a cream coat untouched by rain, as if storms happened to lesser people. Her gaze landed on Ethan first. Then on me. Then on the two mugs sitting on the kitchen counter. There you are, she said smoothly. The board has been trying to reach you for an hour. Tomorrow's merger dinner can't move again. Merger dinner. Board. Again. Whatever warmth had survived the storm died on contact. He set my mug down and stepped back before Ethan could say a word. You should go. It turned toward me, already tense. Glide. But I was done standing in half-light, pretending heat still meant safety while another woman carried his future into my house under her arm like a schedule. Do not come here and talk to me like I still matter, I said. Not when she walks in like she already does. Adriana's expression barely changed, which somehow made it worse. Ethan took one step toward me. That's not what this is. I looked at him, then at her, then at the storm-dark windows behind them both. Maybe that was the cruelest part. I probably believed that. But belief had never stopped him from choosing the cleaner version of his life over the harder truth standing in front of him. He lifted my chin. Go save your evening, Ethan. For a second, no one moved. Then thunder cracked over the harbor so hard it shook the glass. Ethan's jaw tightened. Adriana glanced at him once, waiting. He stood where I was and refused to do either of them the kindness of looking hurt. In the end, he went. And after the door shut behind them, the house felt colder than it had before he came. He stayed in the kitchen a long time after that, staring at the two mugs on the counter while rain hammered the roof and the gutter above the breakfast room groaned under the weight of the storm. By midnight, I had thrown myself back into work because work was simpler than humiliation. By morning, the porch still sagged on the east side, the gutter above the breakfast room hung crooked like it had given up, and I had slept barely 3 hours. Which was exactly when Noah walked in with coffee, a clipboard, and the kind of calm Ethan had never once known how to fake. The next morning, I threw myself at the only thing that still made sense. Work. The storm had passed, but the porch still sagged on the east side, and the gutter above the breakfast room hung crooked like it had finally lost the will to pretend. By 8, Noah was at the Seaview with coffee, a clipboard, and the kind of calm Ethan had never once known how to wear honestly. You look like you slept 3 hours, he said. He took the cup and forced a shrug. That many would be impressive. Didn't they push? That alone made something in my chest loosen. We walked the property together while he talked me through repair priorities, which jobs could wait, and which ones would bury me if I ignored them. No games. No leverage. No careful phrasing designed to make control sound merciful. Just facts. If you want the truth, he said, tapping a porch column with the end of his pen, this place is stubborn. But it's still standing. I looked up at the weathered wood, the cracked paint, the old frame that refused to give in quietly. Sounds familiar. His grin came easy. Mina surprised me by showing up at all. Then Owen came in. From town with a stack of mail in his hand and guilt all over his face. He dropped a notice from the bank onto the front desk and rubbed the back of his neck. Claire, I keep thinking if I hadn't been dragged into that leak mess, maybe you and Ethan would still stop. The word came out sharper than I meant it to, but I didn't take it back. Do not hand him my broken marriage and call it your fault, I said. He made his choice. Owen looked down. I know. You just hate what it cost you. So did I. More than that, I hated that some reckless, unwanted part of me still wondered what it had cost Ethan too. A black SUV rolled past the inn so slowly it might as well have been a threat. Ten anoter. Noah glanced through the window. Those are not local plates. My stomach dropped before my mind caught up. 10 minutes later, the answer came under the front door in the form of a printed invitation delivered by a courier in a Calloway development windbreaker. He unfolded it and read the heading once. Then again. Community Site Review Land Impact Survey Priority Parcel Holders Required to attend. My name was listed first. Beneath it, in clean corporate type, was Ethan Calloway. Noah read over my shoulder and went still. Looks like he isn't just building near you. A looked back at me. Is building around you. Around me. Around the inn. Around whatever part of my life still belonged to me. He stared at the page until the letters blurred, then dropped my eyes to the stamped line at the bottom. Attendance mandatory. No representatives allowed. That should have made me furious. Instead it made me wary. Because Ethan had started circling too tightly for this to be only about zoning maps and shoreline routes. And whatever was waiting for me at that review, he was making sure I would face it beside him. He found the sketchbook by accident. The site review wasn't there until noon, and I had spent the whole morning pretending I wasn't there counting down to it. I was clearing out a warped cabinet in Ian's back office when a faded leather book slid loose from the top shelf and hit the floor at my feet. My breath caught before I even bent to pick it up. It was mine. The one I thought I had lost in Boston. He sat down on the nearest chair and opened it carefully, like memory might tear if I moved too fast. Inside were pages of hand-drawn layouts, porch elevations, window restorations, breakfast room lighting ideas, notes about guest flow, notes about sea-facing suites, notes about preserving old trim instead of gutting it. Not some vague fantasy. Not a hobby. A vision. For this. For a place like Seaview. For years I had told myself I wasn't built for the kind of life that required wanting something clearly. That I didn't have the instinct, the eye, the right kind of ambition. That there wasn't room for dreams that didn't fit into Ethan's world. Page after page proved I had been lying to myself. Or maybe repeating what marriage had taught me. He had wanted this life before I even had the language for it. He had just spent too long shrinking to build it. My throat tightened so fast it hurt. You were never small, I whispered to the woman in those sketches. You were just crowded out. A knock sounded at the office door. I looked up and found Ethan standing there in a navy coat, too polished for the dust and salt around him, but more tired than he had looked at the town meetings. We leave for the shoreline review in 15 minutes, he said. Then his gaze dropped to the book in my hands. A went still. Not politely still. Not waiting still. The kind of stillness that happens when someone recognizes the shape of a loss too late. You kept that. He gave a thin laugh. Apparently not well. A stepped closer, eyes moving over the open pages like he was looking at a version of me he had never actually known. You drew all of this. A long time ago. He shut the book, but not before he had seen enough. I used to do things like this before every room in my life had to make sense to someone else. Something changed in his face then. Not anger. Not defense. Something quieter than either one. And more dangerous. Neither of us spoke again until we were in his truck, headed toward the review site with the bay on one side of the road and winter-stripped trees on the other. I held the sketchbook in my lap the whole drive like evidence. I kept glancing at it between turns. Finally he said, you never showed me these. He turned and looked at him properly. I tried. My voice came out flatter than I felt. Do you remember what you used to say when I wanted to leave Bennett Design and do restoration work full-time? His grip tightened on the steering wheel. Silence. He answered for him. Later, Glide. When things are stable. When the company isn't in the middle of growth. When my schedule opens up. When your hobby fits into real life. He could still hear every version of it. I swallowed once. I shouldn't have said that. You said it for years. The words landed clean between us. Being married to you made me less visible every day. And the worst part is, I helped you do it. The truck went quiet after that. Not empty. Heavy. Like the truth had weight and we were both carrying it badly. When we reached the shoreline marker, Ethan killed the engine but didn't move. His voice was lower when he finally spoke. I didn't know you felt erased. He stared out through the windshield at the grey water beyond the bluffs and almost smiled at the cruelty of it. That is exactly the problem, Ethan. His phone lit up in the cup holder before he could answer. One glance told me enough. Victoria. And beneath her missed call, another name. Adriana. A message preview flashed across the screen before he turned it over. confirming dinner tonight. Whatever had almost softened inside that truck snapped shut at once. He reached for the door handle. Go save your schedule, I said. You clearly already know what matters. He stepped out before he could stop me, the wind off the shoreline hitting hard enough to make my eyes water. By the time I reached the survey flags, I had the sketchbook pressed tight against my side and one ugly truth settled under my ribs. He had spent years becoming smaller in his world. He wasn't about to stand beside him now and pretend not to remember it. Victoria Calloway did not knock. She appeared at the inn the next afternoon like bad weather in Kashmir, her driver waiting at the curb, her expression arranged into something halfway between pity and insult. I was on a ladder in the lobby, measuring a window frame, when her voice cut through the room. Still playing business owner, I see. He climbed down slowly and set the tape measure on the desk before I answered. If Ethan wants my land, he can ask for it himself. Victoria's eyes cooled. He already has. You are the only one pretending this is personal. That stung because it was almost the opposite of the truth. She moved through the lobby with a careful sort of disdain, taking in the drop cloths, the paint samples, the stack of receipts, the open plans on the front desk. Though here, the Seaview was not a future. It was evidence of my refusal to leave gracefully. I came to save us both time, Glide, she said. This project will move forward. You can either leave with dignity or stay and be moved. Then she set a slim envelope on the desk between us. Inside there was an offer. More money than the inn was worth. More money than I had ever seen in one place. Enough to fix a woman's life. Enough to disappear. Enough to let everyone in Boston and Willow Bay tell themselves the story had ended exactly the way women like me were supposed to end. Take it, she said. Buy a condo in Charleston. Open a little bakery. Reinvent yourself somewhere people do not know how this marriage ended. He stared at the number until the edges blurred. Then I folded the paper back into the envelope and slid it toward her. Respectable women know when to step aside, right? Her mouth flattened. Exactly. He held her gaze. Then you should have stepped aside before you taught your son to mistake control for love. That heat. For the first time, something real broke through her perfect face. You think this is about love, she said. This is about damage. Ethan has always confused responsibility with emotion. Do not flatter yourself into thinking regret means anything more. The line went straight for the wound because part of me had already feared it. That whatever softness I had seen in him was not love at all. Just guilt in a better suit. He forced a smile that felt like glass. Then you shouldn't be worried. Her gaze drifted past me toward the blueprints on the desk, the marked-up floor plan, the sketchbook I had left half open beside the window. You are embarrassing this family by making him linger. Family. The word lit something cold and clean inside me. I stopped being your family the day your son chose silence over me in that courthouse. He picked up the envelope and pressed it back into her hand. And I'm done leaving quietly. She took it, but the polish was gone now. You are making a mistake. He climbed back onto the ladder and reached for the tape measure. Maybe, I said. But this one will be mine. She left without another word. He waited until the front door shut before I let myself breathe. Then my phone buzzed in my back pocket. One text. One line. From Ethan. My mother came to see you. Do not agree to anything she offers. I stared at the screen, pulse turning hard and uneven. I already knew. Which meant he hadn't stopped her. Which meant the old machinery was still running exactly the way it always had, money moving first, concern arriving second, and me expected to be grateful for the warning after the damage had already walked through my door. He closed my hand around the phone and looked out across the lobby toward the open plans, the ladder, the battered front windows catching the late afternoon light. Boston had not stayed in Boston. The war had followed me here. And the worst part was, Willow Bay was finally starting to feel like mine. By the time I walked into the Founders Ball, I already knew I did not belong there. The ballroom at the Harbor Club was all glass chandeliers, navy silk, and people who had never once worried about a roof caving in. I stood near the back in a black dress Nora had forced into my hands an hour earlier, telling myself I was only there because half the town board had shown up and I needed to know what Calloway Development was planning next. Then I saw Ethan across the room. Dark suit. Unreadable face. Surrounded by investors and polished men who looked like they had never touched anything they could not invoice. My chest tightened with that old, humiliating recognition. It still looked like power. It still looked like the life that had cut me out and moved on without losing a step. The auction started after dinner. Parcel maps flashed onto the screen near the stage one after another, shoreline lots, marina access strips, historic easements wrapped in donor language and expensive smiles. He stayed still until lot 14 appeared. Then my pulse dropped. The narrow parcel bordering the eastern edge of the Seaview property lit up under the chandelier glow like a sentence already halfway written. If Calloway Development owned that strip, they could box the inn in from the harbor side and choke off every access point that mattered. The bidding opened. Before I could fully breathe, Ethan raised his paddle. 400,000. The room shifted. Another bidder answered from the far side of the ballroom. Ethan raised again without hesitation. Calm. Precise. Mercedes. By the time the gavel came down, the parcel was his. Just like that. The applause that followed sounded distant and wrong, like the room was celebrating a future I had not agreed to survive and I should have left then. He should have walked out before the next blow landed. Instead I stayed long enough to hear Adriana step onto the low stage in a silver dress that caught every light in the room. She lifted her glass with practiced grace and smiled toward Ethan in a way that did not need a ring to make its meaning clear. To the future of Willow Bay, she said, and to the leadership that will carry this project, and this next chapter, exactly where it belongs. Laughter followed. Applause. A few knowing looks moved through the crowd like sparks catching dry paper. It was not an engagement announcement. It was worse. It was public belonging. She did not have to say she stood beside him. The room already believed it. Only then did Ethan see me near the back. Something changed in his face. Not triumph. Not indifference. Something closer to alarm. It started toward me immediately, weaving through donors and board members, but by then I was already done listening. He turned and walked out into the cold salt air before he could reach me. The terrace outside the harbor club was slick with sea mist, the harbor beyond it black and restless under the lights. He made it halfway to the stone. Rallying before I heard my name behind me. Clyde. He kept moving. I caught up near the edge of the terrace and stepped in front of me. It's not what you think. He laughed, and the sound came out flatter than I intended. You bought land around my inn, let her toast your future, and now you want nuance. His jaw tightened. I bought that parcel to stop Mason from taking it. Do not. He stepped back before he could come closer. Do not insult me by making your takeover sound noble. The harbor lights shook across the water between us. Ethan stood there like the ghost of every bad decision I had ever loved. Clyde, listen to me, he said, lower now, urgent in a way I did not trust. If Mason had gotten that parcel, he could have forced an access challenge on your property within weeks. He stared at him, furious that the explanation almost sounded possible. Furious that I no longer knew when he was protecting me and when he was simply better dressed while doing damage. My phone buzzed in my hand. He almost ignored it. Then I glanced down. Unknown number. A new message waited on the screen. If you want to save the inn, stop trusting Ethan Calloway. My blood turned cold. There was an attachment beneath it. And the subject line was only 4 words long. Original leak case notes. For a second, the whole terrace seemed to tilt. The wind. The water. Ethan's voice still saying my name somewhere in front of me. All of it dropped behind the message glowing in my hand. He looked up slowly. Ethan must have seen something change in my face, because he took 1 step toward me. What is it? He closed my fingers around the phone before he could see the screen. Nothing in Boston had ever really ended. Not the divorce. Not Owen. Not the leak case. Not the story Ethan had signed his name beneath and called necessary. The past had not stayed buried. It had found me on a terrace over black water, while the man who once chose silence over me stood close enough to hear my pulse. He met his eyes and said the only thing I trusted in that moment. "I think you need to stop following me." Then I walked past him and did not look back. But I could feel him standing there behind me all the way to the parking lot, while the message burned in my hand like a match dropped into dry grass. Because whatever was in that file, it was not going to leave either of us untouched. The file was gone by morning. He had opened the message 3 times the night before, but the attachment never loaded, and by sunrise the entire thing had vanished from my inbox like someone had reached into my phone and erased it by hand. He stood behind the Seaview front desk with my coffee going cold and the same sentence repeating in my head. "Stop trusting Ethan Calloway." Fine. Easy enough. The harder part was the second line. The one I had not been able to unread. Original leak case notes. By 10 o'clock, I had made the first decision in weeks that felt entirely my own. He was done reacting. If Calloway Development wanted to corner me quietly, then I was going to drag the fight into daylight. I booked the town green for a Seaview restoration fundraiser, called 3 local vendors, and asked Nora to help me build a donor list before gossip got there first. "You are serious," she said over the phone. "Completely." He stood in the breakfast room with a legal pad in one hand and my grandmother sold window measurements in the other, staring at the place like determination alone could make it stand straighter. "If they want a bitter ex-wife," I said, "they are going to be disappointed. They're getting a business owner." Saying it out loud steadied me. By noon I was sitting across from Dana Mercer, Willow Bay's least charming and most effective land use attorney, while she read through the easement notice, the transfer documents from the Harbor Club auction, and every page of project language I had highlighted in fury. "You needed representation yesterday," she said, dropping the stack onto her desk. "I'm fresh out of politeness." That earned me the smallest almost smile. Then she slid a retainer agreement across the desk. The number made my stomach tighten. He signed anyway. Better debt than surrender. When I got back to the inn, Noah was in the gravel lot unloading reclaimed porch boards from his truck. The timing of it, Lambert. Invoices, work, something real and ordinary, should have comforted me. Instead I noticed the black SUV first. Ethan stepped out wearing the kind of control that only ever showed up when he hadn't slept. "We need to talk," he said. "No, just that. Plan. Final." His gaze moved to the lumber, then to Noah, then back to me. Something dark flickered there and disappeared so quickly I almost missed it. "Clyde, whatever message you got last night, do not act on it without showing me." My pulse kicked hard. Interesting. So he knew about the text, or knew enough to guess. "You sound less like an ex-husband," I said, "and more like a man both scared." His jaw tightened. Jewelry being targeted. Noah straightened beside the truck, one hand still resting on a stack of weathered boards. "Then maybe you should ask why trouble keeps arriving with your company logo on it." The air between them sharpened instantly. Ethan looked at him like he had stepped into a war he didn't understand. Noah looked back like he didn't care. Then Luke leaned from the driver's seat and called Ethan's name. He only caught fragments. "Borput." Mason pushed it up. "If you don't get back now," Ethan went still, then turned back to me with something dangerously close to frustration. "Do not do anything until I come back." He laughed once, cold enough to surprise even me. That order expired with the marriage license. It held my stare for a second too long, then got back in the SUV and left in a spray of gravel. I stood there with Dana's retainer folded in my bag, Noah's lumber stacked in my lot, and a fundraiser already beginning to take shape in my head. If Ethan Calloway was that rattled, then Mason Reed was not just after my land. He was moving fast enough to make even Ethan look over his shoulder. The gossip headline hit before my fundraiser flyers had finished printing. Nora burst into the Seaview just after 8, phone in hand, face already telling me this was bad. "Do not react yet," she said. Which, of course, meant I grabbed the phone immediately. The article sat on one of those glossy regional sites that pretend they report business while feeding off other people's humiliation. Calloway. Keir's ex-wife allegedly exploits waterfront dispute for cash and sympathy. My name was everywhere. Bitter. Strategic. Financially desperate. According to the article, I was using the divorce, and Ethan's presence in Willow Bay to pressure Calloway Development into offering me a bigger payout. I read the first paragraph twice and felt my face go hot. Not because it was new. Because it was familiar. Public shame in better grammar. Owen swore under his breath from the doorway. Noah took the phone from my hand, scanned half the piece, and dropped it onto the counter like it was dirty. This is not reporting, he said. This is a setup. I already knew that. What I didn't know yet was how much damage it had already done. The first cancellation came an hour later. Then the second. Then a voicemail from a local bakery politely backing out because they did not want to get dragged into elite divorce drama. By noon, 2 donors had gone quiet, 1 vendor wanted cash up front, and the fundraiser I had built to prove I could stand on my own was starting to look exactly like the desperate stunt they had described. He stared at the list of losses until the names blurred. They want me embarrassed, I said. No, Nora answered softly. They want you exhausted. That landed harder. The front door opened before I could answer. Ethan walked in with Dana Mercer already behind him, legal pad in hand, as if they had been moving too quickly to argue on the way over. The room changed the second he stepped inside. The article is false, he said, voice flat as steel. My attorneys are filing defamation notices and preservation demands today. He folded my arms. How generous. He ignored the tone and turned to Dana. Subpoena the source if they refuse retraction. I want the publication's contact trail, payment records, and draft history. Dana nodded once, already writing. Then Ethan looked back at me. Clyde, I'm trying to stop this before it costs you more. He let out one sharp laugh. That's your favorite position, isn't it? The man who destroys the floor and then rushes in offering a hand. His expression changed. Not anger. Something closer to hurt. That only made me angry. Do not stand here playing savior, I said. You do not get points for cleaning up bloodless messes your world keeps making. Silence dropped through the room. Nora looked away. Even Noah stayed still. Ethan held my gaze for one long second, then said, then stop calling it my world like I'm not trying to tear pieces of it apart for you. The words hit and stayed there. He hated that. I hated more that before I could answer, Dana's phone buzzed. She glanced down at the screen, then at Ethan, and the set of her face tightened. It's worse than a blog hit, she said. Somebody just sent the article to every member of the town preservation board with an anonymous note claiming Clyde's funding is fraudulent. No one spoke for a moment. Then Noah swore quietly. Nora went pale. And I felt something colder than humiliation settle into place under my ribs. This was no longer gossip. Someone was building a case. By the next morning, the first shipment of porch lumber was gone. Not delayed. Gone. Noah stood in the gravel lot with both hands on his hips, staring at the empty space where the delivery truck was supposed to be unloading, while I reread the supplier email for the 4th time. Delivery completed at 7:12 de la mañana, signed and received. My name was forged at the bottom. I did not sign anything, I said. Noah took the phone from my hand, scanned it once, and swore under his breath. Then somebody wants you to look disorganized before the preservation board reviews your funding. That was the clean version. The uglier one was obvious enough without saying it aloud. Someone was no longer content to whisper about ruining me. They were putting their hands directly on the work. Before I could even decide what to do first, my phone rang. Dana. My shoreline permit packet is missing, I said before she could speak, because somehow the day already felt like it had chosen a theme. No, she said. It's worse. Your shoreline permit packet has gone missing from the clerk's intake file. He looked across the lobby at the porch plans spread over the desk and felt my chest tighten with a fury old enough to feel familiar. Not rejected. Not delayed. Missing. That does not happen by accident, Dana said. No. It didn't. Every time I tried to move forward, some invisible hand reached out and shoved me back just hard enough to make me question whether I had moved at all. From the doorway, Owen said, "Call Ethan." He turned on him. Why would I do that? His face fell, but he didn't look away. Because whether you trust him or not, trouble keeps showing up with Calloway fingerprints on it. I hated that he wasn't entirely wrong. An hour later, Ethan walked into the inn as if the town itself had answered Owen for me. It took one look at my face, the empty lot outside, the open permit folder on the desk, and went still. What happened? Your world happened. I told him about the forged delivery, the missing permit, the anonymous fraud note, all of it. His expression hardened with every word, but not in the way I expected. Not defensive. Calculating. Dangerous in a colder direction. The supplier is tied to a subcontract shell I saw in Mason's expansion packet, he said, more to himself than to me. And the intake clerk used to work with one of our outside zoning vendors. He folded my arms tight across my chest. So this is pressure. Corporate pressure. You just forgot to mention the part where I'm the one getting crushed. I met my gaze then, sharp and direct. Clyde, I'm telling you this because I do not think this is standard project pressure anymore. The room went quiet. For the first time since Boston, he looked less like a man trying to manage fallout and more like a man realizing the fire had spread past his control. Be careful, he said. Mason is moving pieces too fast. He gave a short, bitter laugh. That sounds suspiciously like another command. His jaw tightened. Take it as a warning, then. He should have thrown it back in his face. Instead I looked down at the forged signature on the delivery email and felt something colder than anger begin to settle. Because if Ethan was right, then this was no longer just about land. Someone wanted me cornered badly enough to tamper with paper trails, suppliers, permits, and public perception all at once. Someone wanted me tired, discredited, and alone. And for one brief, deeply unwelcome second, I almost believed Ethan was the only person in Willow Bay who fully understood how ugly this was becoming. That thought frightened me more than the missing lumber. Because danger was easier to survive when it looked like an enemy. What I had never learned how to survive was the possibility that the man who once broke me might also be the first one to recognize the shape of the trap closing around me now. The town clerk's email arrived at 7:03 de la mañana and gave me exactly 48 hours to complete a joint shoreline access review with Ethan Calloway or risk losing my permit priority. He read it twice. Then a third time, as if the wording might get less offensive if I stared at it hard enough. He did not. Mandatory on-site inspection. All primary parcel holders must be present. No substitutions. He wanted to laugh. Or scream. Instead I pulled on boots, grabbed my field folder, and walked down to the bluffs with my jaw locked so tight it hurt. The wind off the water was sharp enough to sting. Gray waves struck the rocks below in hard, ugly bursts, and the survey flags along the edge of the property snapped in the breeze like warnings I was expected to interpret politely. Ethan was already there. Dark coat. Clipboard in hand. Looking exactly like the kind of man who belonged in expensive trouble. You're late, he said. He checked the time on my phone. By 40 seconds. Try surviving it. Something almost moved at the corner of his mouth, but he buried it quickly. Good. He did not need warmth. He needed a signed review and an exit. Two county staffers handed us clipboards, explained the process in voices so bland they might as well have been reading from weather reports, then moved far enough away to become useless. Within minutes I was trapped on a muddy bluff with the man I had divorced and the project still circling my life. We started along the eastern boundary line. The ground was slick from old rain, the brush dense, the bluff edge uneven enough to make every step feel like an argument with gravity. Ethan pointed out runoff channels, erosion cuts, and a collapsed retaining wall segment I had not seen from above. He hated how quickly my mind moved. We's his. If I redirect runoff here, I said, sketching over the survey map, the inside keeps its foundation dry without losing guest access. A looked at the page, then at me. That's the cleanest solution. The words landed harder than they should have. Not because he agreed with me. Because once upon a time, his approval could steady me or ruin my week, and some buried part of me still remembered that too well. It's called competence, I said without looking up. You should try recognizing it sooner than 5 years late. It took the hit without flinching. The county staffers asked for a unified logistics note near the final marker, then drifted off again, leaving us crouched over the same clipboard while the wind tore at the papers in our hands. He penciled in storm barriers, access widths, guest parking flow, shoreline buffer limits. Ethan leaned in just enough to read over my shoulder. You still do that, he said quietly. He kept writing. Do what? Tap the pencil twice before you solve something. My hand stopped. Such a small thing. Such a terrible thing to remember. He straightened too fast. You don't get points for noticing me now. His eyes held mine. I'm starting to think noticing you too late is the reason I'm standing here at all. My pulse betrayed me first. Anger was easier when he sounded arrogant. Harder when he sounded tired. He turned away and walked toward the last marker near the bluff edge just as a gust came off the water hard enough to rip my hat loose and send one of the survey sheets skidding over the wet grass. He lunged on instinct. Ethan caught my wrist before my boots could slide too far down the muddy incline. The grip was fast. Firm. Familiar in a way I did not want any part of. "He got you," he said. The words went straight through me. He yanked my hand back the second I found my footing. That is exactly the kind of sentence you don't get to say anymore. Didn't they argue? He bent, picked up the survey sheet, and handed it to me without letting our fingers touch. Then his phone buzzed. I glanced down before he could stop himself. Adriana. A message preview flashed across the screen. Private dinner confirmed. Something. Cold slid back into place under my ribs. The bluff, the maps, the almost rhythm of working side by side, gun. He took the paper from him and stepped back. Finish your review, Ethan. You clearly have somewhere more important to be. I handed the signed packet to the county staffer without looking at him again. By the time I turned toward the path back up the bluff, the wind had sharpened, the clouds had lowered, and I could feel rain coming in across the harbor. Whatever clarity that morning might have offered was already slipping out to sea. The rain started just after sunset and trapped us before either of us could pretend we had somewhere better to be. The county review had run long, the bluff trail had turned to mud, and by the time we made it back to the Seaview the road toward the harbor was half flooded. Ethan stood in my lobby with rain on his shoulders and his phone in his hand, listening to some assistant explain why the dinner he was supposed to attend could still be salvaged if he left now. A ended the call without answering and slipped the phone into his pocket. Looks like you're stranded, I said. A glanced at the windows rattling under the wind and gave the smallest nod. Looks like we both are. Necessity took over before pride could object. The power flickered twice. He went straight for candles and the old emergency lanterns my grandmother used to keep under the pantry sink. Ethan asked where the fuse box was and disappeared into the back hall before I could tell him not to touch anything. Then minutes later he came back with his tie loosened, sleeves rolled, and the kitchen lights holding steady. Temporary fix, he said. Don't trust it. He opened the pantry and stared at canned tomatoes, dried pasta, and one loaf of bread. Fine. You save the wiring. Ella save dinner. It should not have looked like he belonged in my kitchen. That was the first problem. The second was that he remembered it too well. I boiled pasta. I found basil in the herb box by the sink as if he had always known where I kept things, which was impossible and somehow still true. At one point our hands brushed reaching for the same wooden spoon. He pulled back first. I said nothing, which was almost worse. The storm pressed against the windows while the kitchen filled with steam, candlelight, and that old, dangerous rhythm we used to mistake for home. You still taste the sauce before you salt it, he said. He looked over my shoulder. You still notice useless things. His mouth shifted slightly. It was never useless. That should not have landed. Eat teeth. We ate at the old kitchen table with mismatched plates and no music except the rain. It took one bite, looked at me over the candlelight, and said, "You still put too much pepper in the sauce." He nearly smiled. And you still eat it anyway. Silence followed. Not empty silence. The worst kind. The kind that remembered too much. He stood to rinse my plate just to move, just to break the feeling before it became something I would regret. Claire. My name sounded different in his mouth when he said it like that. Less like a problem. More like a bruise. He kept my back to him. Don't. His chair scraped lightly across the floor. I need to say this. Then say it fast. I did not. Of course he didn't. I came closer, stopping just far enough behind me to leave the air between us charged and unbearable. Walking out of that courthouse, he said quietly, was the first time I realized I had made a mistake I couldn't outwork, outspin, or undo. The plate in my hand slipped against the water and clinked hard enough to make me flinch. For one dangerous second, I wanted to turn around and ask him what mistake he meant. The divorce. The silence. Me. I love it. Instead I set the plate down carefully and faced him anyway. You do not get to come into my kitchen, sound almost honest, and expect that to fix what you broke. His eyes held mine, steady and unguarded in a way I was not prepared for. I know. That was the worst part. It sounded like he finally did. Headlights swept across the front windows before either of us could say anything else. A car door shut outside. Then the front door opened without a knock, and Adriana Vale stepped into my lobby in cream cashmere and impatience, her gaze moving from Ethan to the candlelit kitchen to the two half-empty plates on my table. She smiled. There was nothing warm in it. There you are, she said. The board dinner is waiting, and everyone is asking why you disappeared. Then her eyes found me fully. I didn't realize you were entertaining. Whatever softness had survived the storm died where I stood. He looked at Ethan, then at Adriana, then back at the room that had almost started to feel unsafe in a very different way. You should go, I said. This time my voice did not shake at all. Ethan turned toward me. Claire, but I was done standing in half-light, pretending 1 hour of warmth could survive the life he kept stepping back into. Go save your evening, Ethan. For a second, no one moved. Then thunder cracked over the harbor so hard it rattled the glass. Adriana glanced at him once, already expecting the answer. He refused to make it easier by looking hurt. In the end, he went. And after the door shut behind them, the house felt colder than it had before he came. He stayed in the kitchen a long time after that, staring at the 2 mugs and the 2 plates and the proof that hope could still sneak into a room even after you thought you had boarded every window shut. By midnight, I had thrown myself back into work because work was simpler than humiliation. By morning, I had slept barely 3 hours. By 9 the next morning, Willow Bay had already decided what my night with Ethan meant. Nora did not even bother with a greeting when she called. Do not go online. Which, of course, meant I opened the first link she sent anyway. There it was. A photo of Ethan leaving the Harbor Club after midnight with Adriana on his arm, both of them polished, composed, devastatingly public. Another angle showed them under the awning of his hotel, close enough to feed every ugly assumption in town. The caption was worse. Calloway are back on track after private delay in merger talks. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like humiliation had gravity. One storm-soaked night in my kitchen. One almost honest confession. And by morning he was back in his real life wearing another woman on his arm like nothing had happened. As if whatever cracked open between us under candlelight had already been filed away, managed, and braced for cameras. Before I could even steady myself, Adriana posted a clipped statement through the Harbor Club account. She was smiling in a photo I wanted to throw across the room. We are looking forward to an important formal announcement tied to the future of Willow Bay. Formal announcement. She did not have to say engagement, alliance, merger, partnership. People would hear all of it anyway. The comments were already full of congratulations, gossip, and one line that made my face burn hotter than it should have. Guess the ex-wife was just a weather delay. He locked my phone and set it down hard. Never again, I whispered to the empty room. Never that stupid again. That afternoon, Ethan showed up outside the inn like he still had the right to explain himself. He met him on the porch and did not invite him in. Claire, listen to me, he said, too fast, too urgent. The board forced that appearance. Investors were already rattled after last night. Adriana and I had to stabilize, I laughed before he could finish. Stabilize what, exactly? Your stock price? Your image? Your future? His face tightened. It isn't that personal. That line should have died in his throat before it reached me. That is the problem, I said. It is always personal when I pay for it, and professional when you do. The sea wind cut between us hard enough to sting. For once, Ethan looked like a man running out of ways to make me believe him. Nothing happened, he said. He held his gaze and hated that part of me still cared enough to hurt. Something happened, I said quietly. You let me forget who you are for one night. He stepped inside before he could answer and shut the door with my pulse hammering like I had just survived something. Maybe I had. He barely took 2 full breaths before my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a gossip post. It was a text from Noah Carter. Dinner tomorrow night, if you want one evening with no games, no headlines, and no Callaways. He stared at the message for a long moment. No manipulations. No half-truths in tailored suits. No one asking me to trust damage because it claimed to be necessary. Just one evening that promised to be quiet. And maybe that was exactly why it frightened me. Because peace sounded smarter than hope. And I was beginning to suspect that hope, where Ethan was concerned, had always been the more dangerous choice. He said yes to Noah because peace sounded smarter than hope. The text sat on my screen for a full minute before I answered, my thumb hovering like the wrong word might still change who I was becoming. Then I typed 4 simple words, dinner sounds nice. The second I hit send, something inside me tightened. Not regret. Not exactly. More like the ache of choosing the safe door while still knowing which one had once burned me down. Noah picked me up just after 7 in his truck, clean shirt, steady eyes, no performance. It took me to a small place on the marina with string lights, shoulder, and the kind of easy conversation that did not feel like a negotiation. He asked about the inn. He asked about the years he had spent rebuilding storm-damaged houses up and down the coast. He listened when I spoke. Really listen. No correcting. No redirecting. No invisible scoreboard keeping score of who mattered more in the room. Halfway through dinner, he set down his fork and said, you know you don't have to prove you can survive everything alone, right? The line landed softer than I wanted it to. He looked at the candle between us and let out one tired breath. I think surviving alone became a habit. Then I laughed. A real laugh. Ismael, but real. Noah smiled like he had not been trying to earn it, which made it matter more. For one fragile hour, the world went quiet. No headlines. No board politics. No Ethan-shaped storm sitting in the middle of every thought. Just warmth. Simplicity. A version of life that did not ask me to bleed before it called itself love. Then the restaurant door opened, and the room changed before I even turned around. Ethan walked in with 2 board members and Mason Reed, all tailored coats and expensive tension. The second his gaze found me across that little marina table, everything else seemed to drop away. I looked at Noah first. Then at the candle. Then at the way I was leaning forward, calm in a way I had not been around him in months. Something dark passed over his face before he smoothed it flat. Mason noticed. Of course he did. I leaned toward Ethan and said something too low for me to hear, but I did not need the words to read the shape of it. Pressure. Timin. Opportunity. Ethan kept staring 1 second too long before forcing himself toward the back table. Noah followed my line of sight and went still. Trouble, he asked lightly. He could have lied. Instead I took a sip of wine and said, usually. After dinner, Noah walked me back to the inn and stopped under the porch light with his hands in his jacket pockets. No games. No push. I like being around you, Clyde, he said. That's all I'm asking you to know tonight. Relief should have felt uncomplicated. It didn't. Safe had its own danger, because safe had never once made my heart race. He thanked him, watched him drive away, and turned toward the front door just as my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. One message. From Luke. Mason just pushed an emergency board vote tonight. Ethan is fighting it alone, and he is losing. He stood in the dark entryway with my keys still in my hand and felt that old, unwanted pull under my ribs. He should have put the phone down. He should have let Calloway men bleed in Calloway boardrooms and called it justice. Instead I stared at Luke's message until one ugly truth settled into place. Whatever was happening inside that company had stopped being only Ethan's problem the moment it started rewriting mine. Luke's message should have been none of my business. That was the problem. He stood in the Seaview entryway with my coat still on, phone blowing in my hand, and felt that old dangerous instinct I had spent weeks trying to cut out of myself. Ethan is fighting it alone, and he is losing. He should have put the phone down. He should have left the Calloways to drown in the machinery they built. Instead I texted Luke one word. Where? His reply came back almost immediately, followed by another message 2 minutes later. If you care about what happened in the leak case, ask me before Mason buries it for good. He called him before I could change my mind. He answered on the first ring, voice low and tight. I should have done this sooner, he said. Mason pushed IT to purge archived security logs during the divorce. He made a copy before they disappeared. He straightened so fast the porch floor creaked beneath me. Why are you telling me now? There was a silence on the line, then Luke said, because Ethan finally stopped protecting the wrong people. An hour later, Luke pulled up outside the inn in a gray sedan with a laptop bag on the passenger seat and guilt written all over his face. We sat at my kitchen table while Owen hovered in the doorway pretending not to listen. Luke opened old audit folders, timestamp logs, access trails. At first, it looked exactly the way I remembered it. Owen's credentials. Restricted file movement. Internal leak pathway. The story I had already been forced to survive once. Then Luke clicked deeper into the metadata. My breath caught. Some of the evidence had been altered after submission. Not by Owen. After. That's impossible, I whispered. Luke shook his head once. Not impossible. Buried. The meaning landed slowly and all at once. Ethan had divorced me over a case that was not clean. Over evidence with cracks in it. Maybe he had not known the full truth. Maybe he had seen enough to doubt it and chosen the cleaner story anyway. He hated both possibilities. Luke looked at me carefully across the table. He only found the pattern because Mason reused the same vendor structures around your inn. The room went silent around that sentence. Past and present. Sami Khan. Sami War. Sami woman being cornered from 2 different directions and called collateral both times. He gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles ached. Did Ethan know there were inconsistencies back then? Luke hesitated. That was answer enough to make something inside me go cold. Then he opened one more file. A routing report. Amended 2 days before my divorce hearing. Owen's name had been inserted where someone else's had originally been flagged. He stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Not because I didn't understand. Because I understood too well. Ethan had not just failed to save me. There was a chance he had seen enough to doubt the case and still asked me to sign. My phone. Bass on the table before I could breathe through that thought. Ethan. He found something. He need to see you tonight. I looked at the message, then at the altered report with Owen's stolen guilt glowing on the laptop between my hands. For the first time since the courthouse, I was not afraid of seeing Ethan. He was afraid of what I was going to ask him when I did. Ethan came to the Seaview after midnight with rain in his hair and the kind of face a man wears when he has finally run out of lies. I was already waiting in the lobby with Lucas' copied files spread across the front desk and Owen's name glowing like a wound on every page. Ethan stopped the second he saw them. Good. Let him. He picked up the amended routing report, and when I spoke, my fingers were steadier than my voice had any right to be. Tell me you never saw this kind of inconsistency before the divorce. It went still in that dangerous, controlled way that used to mean he was choosing every word like a weapon. Glide, no, I stepped back before he could get too close. Do not say my name like it's going to soften this. Answer me. The silence that followed was not long, but it was enough. Enough to confirm what I had been afraid to ask. Enough to hollow something out inside my chest. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower and rougher than I had heard in months. I found irregularities. Not enough to prove Owen was innocent. Not enough to stop what Mason and legal were already building. But enough that I knew the case was not clean. He laughed, and the sound came out broken. You knew it was dirty, and you still put divorce papers in front of me. His jaw flexed hard. I thought settling it fast would keep Owen out of court and keep you out of a public trial. He stared at him in disbelief so sharp it almost felt like clarity. You did not protect me, Ethan. You managed me. That hit. He saw it land. Good. Let it. It moved closer, not touching me, just standing there like distance itself had become unbearable. I thought I was making the least destructive choice, he said. Then, quieter, I was wrong. He wanted that. Confession to feel like justice. It didn't they? It felt like being cut open and told the knife had good intentions. Do you hear yourself? He asked. You had doubt. You had money. You had power. And when it mattered, you chose the cleaner story instead of me. It closed his eyes for one brutal second. Yes. Just that. No balanced argument. No careful denial. Somehow that hurt more. Because if he had lied, I could have hated him cleanly. Truth made room for regret, and regret was harder to survive. He gathered the papers into my arms like armor and stepped around him. Trust dies the first time, I said quietly. Not the last. The first. It turned as I moved toward the stairs. Clyde, please. He stopped, but I did not face him. The word please sounded wrong in his mouth. To late. To human. To dangerous. Do not ask me for anything tonight, I said. You already took the one thing I can never rebuild the same way. He kept walking, each step harder than the last, until his voice followed me one final time through the dark. Then let me fix the part one can. He should have ignored him. He almost did. Back before I reached the top landing, my phone buzzed with a new town alert Dana had forwarded to every stakeholder in Willow Bay. Emergency public hearing. New financial allegations filed against Seaview Inn Restoration Fund. Scheduled for tomorrow morning. He looked down at the screen, then back toward the lobby where Ethan still stood among the scattered papers and the truth he had finally admitted too late. A had confessed the past. By sunrise, someone was already weaponizing the present. The hearing room was already full when I walked in. For one sharp second, I had the insane thought that this was simply what my life had become. Courthouses. Boardrooms. Public rooms full of people waiting to see whether I would break cleanly enough to be called reasonable. Dana stood beside me with a file folder tucked under her arm. Ethan was across the aisle near the Calloway table, speaking to Mason in a voice too low to carry, but the tension in his shoulders said enough. Whatever this was, it had moved past gossip. The town clerk read the complaint into the record in a tone so neutral it almost made the words worse. Anonymous financial allegations. Suspected misuse of restoration funds. Questionable vendor activity tied to Seaview Inn. My stomach dropped, not because I believed any of it, but because the language was too polished. Todo precise. Built to sound official before anyone had bothered to prove it was true. Dana rose first. Calm. Sharp. Un second. She stated for the record that every dollar in my restoration account had been documented, that all disbursements were traceable, and that anonymous allegations backed by no verified source trail should never have reached a public hearing in the first place. Then Mason stood. Of course he did. Smooth as glass, expensive concern in his voice, he offered Calloway Development as a stable alternative for the shoreline parcel if private restoration efforts proved structurally unreliable. Set the fire. Offered to buy the ashes. He almost laughed at the elegance of it. Then Ethan asked to see the filing. The room let him, because men like Ethan Calloway were rarely denied anything in public. It took the complaint at the podium and read it once. Then again, slower. He watched the exact moment recognition landed. His gaze moved to two vendor names buried near the bottom of the filing, then lifted to Mason. Not disbelief. Not surprise. Recognition. Cold spread through my chest. I knew something. Or he had finally seen the same pattern I had been drowning in for weeks. Mason stepped toward the microphone before anyone else could react, already shaping the room back toward his version of events. Obviously, this is regrettable, he said, but we have to think about investor confidence, community continuity, and the long term. Sit down, Mason. The sentence landed flat and hard enough to silence the room. Mason smiled without warmth. Ethan, now is not the time to make this personal. Ethan did not even look at him. No, he said, voice like steel dragged over stone. Now is exactly the time to make it precise. The room held still around him. Every donor. Every board member. Every local business owner who had whispered about me in hallways and meeting rooms now leaned forward like truth had suddenly become expensive. Ethan placed the filing back on the podium and faced the board. These allegations appear to route through entities connected to active Calloway development vendor networks, he said. If there is fraud in this room, it is far more likely to have come through my company's channels than Claire Bennett's restoration fund. The words hit like glass cracking under pressure. Mason went pale first. 3 rows back, Victoria Calloway went completely still. Even Dana looked startled, though she recovered faster than anyone else. Ethan kept going. As of this moment, I am requesting an immediate internal audit, a suspension review of related project approvals, and a full preservation hold on every claim made against Seaview until the source trail is verified. The room erupted. Questions. Objections. Sharp voices talking over one another. Mason stepped forward, furious now, but the damage was already done. Ethan had done the one thing I had needed months too late and still had not expected today. He had chosen a side in public. Across the aisle, his eyes found mine. I will not let her take this fall again, he said. Again. That was the word that landed hardest. Not because of the room. Because now everyone in it knew there had been a first time. And by the look on Mason's face, Ethan's public stand had not ended the war. It had dragged the real one into daylight. By noon the next day, Ethan Calloway's name was everywhere. Temporary recusal. Internal audit. Calloway air under pressure. I read every headline from behind the Seaview front desk with my coffee turning cold and the strange, unwelcome feeling that none of them sounded like the man I had spent years knowing. Then Dana walked in carrying a slim leather folder and the kind of expression I had learned to respect. Surprise. This came from Ethan, she said. Personally. He opened it. Inside was everything power usually refused to surrender without a fight. Signed recusal notice. Project authority transferred pending audit. Access waivers. Vendor trail summaries. Archive board communications tied to both the current sabotage campaign and the original leak case. He looked up too quickly. He handed this over. Dana nodded once. No restrictions. No confidentiality trap. No ownership language. Used access. That hit harder than it should have. Ethan had spent half our marriage controlling damage with paperwork. These felt like the opposite. Not management. Surrender. He found him outside the inn an hour later, standing near the porch rail Noah had finally stabilized, hands in his coat pockets, the harbor wind moving through his hair like he had forgotten to care what he looked like. You stepped back from the waterfront project, I said. I met my eyes without flinching. I had to. Because it was the right thing to do. His jaw moved once. Because every time I stayed in control, you paid for it. The line stayed where it landed. It did not come closer. It did not ask for credit. It just stood there with the bay behind him and the wreckage of his own choices finally visible on his face. Then he held out a flash drive. Everything I could pull before Mason starts locking doors, he said. Old vendor routes. Board approvals. Internal legal memos. The original review notes tied to Owen. I stared at the drive in his hand and hated that my own hand hesitated before taking it. Why are you giving me this? His answer came too fast to be polished. Because you should never have had to fight for the truth with less power than the people hiding it. For one reckless second, I almost thanked him. Then the courthouse came back to me in a rush. The papers. His silence. The way he had once stood in front of me and called erasure the least destructive choice. He took the drive and closed my fingers around it anyway. Do not mistake access for forgiveness, I said. I'm not. His voice stayed low and steady. I'm trying very hard not to mistake doing the bare minimum too late for redemption. That was the kind of honesty I had spent years wanting from him. Now that it was here, it felt less like comfort and more like standing too close to a fire you already knew could burn through walls. He turned toward the inn. Clyde. He stopped at the door, but I did not look back. What? The wind carried his answer to me anyway. I know helping you now may never bring you back. Abit. Tenanoter. I'm doing it anyway. He stood there with the flash drive in my hand and my heartbeat suddenly unsteady, because that was the first thing Ethan had given me in years that did not sound like strategy. And that made it more dangerous than control had ever been. The lender's email hit harder than the divorce papers had. Maybe because this time, no one even bothered to pretend it was personal. I was in the breakfast room with Dana's notes spread across one end of the table and Ethan's flash drive plugged into my laptop when the subject line lit up my screen. Funding release suspended pending risk review. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like the floor had tilted under me. I opened the email, read every line twice, and still ended up staring at the same sentence. Due to unresolved fraud concerns and community instability, the next construction disbursement would be frozen indefinitely. No porch repairs. No electrical work. No kitchen permit clearance. The Seaview would not survive indefinitely on grit and borrowed optimism. Owen saw my face from the doorway and came closer. What happened? He turned the laptop toward him. I read in silence, then looked up with guilt already rising. This is because of me. No, I snapped, too fast, too sharp. Then softer, because he did not deserve the full force of a wound someone else had opened. This is because somebody keeps poisoning anything with my name on it. An hour later, I found Owen upstairs packing a duffel bag. Not frantically. Carefully. Like a man trying to turn himself into a solution. What are you doing? I folded another shirt without looking at me. Leaving before I wreck anything else. Anger came so fast it almost steadied me. You do not get to make yourself the villain because it's easier than staying. I finally looked up then, eyes rimmed with the kind of shame I knew too well. Clyde, every trail still circles back to me. If I go, maybe people stop using me against you. He hated that it almost sounded logical. He hated more that we were both tired enough to consider it. A knock sounded downstairs before I could answer. When I reached the lobby, Ethan was already inside. A banker's card in one hand and a clipped bridge term sheet in the other. He took one look at my face, the open laptop, the half-packed silence hanging over the house, and knew enough. Your lender froze the release. Not a question. I can cover the gap until Dana clears the record, he said. No ownership. No collateral on the inn. No hidden conditions. He laughed once, bitter enough to sting. Do you hear yourself? You sound like a man trying to sell me trust by the page. I did not flinch. I am trying to keep your project alive. I held the papers out to me like he already knew I would hate them. Maybe that was the cruel part. I understood me better now that it was too late to matter cleanly. He took the term sheet. Tore it in half once. Then again. And let the pieces fall onto the front desk between us. I would rather lose this place on my own terms, I said, than survive by owing you again. The words cost me. I knew it. He knew it. I only nodded once and stepped back, hands empty now. Then I'll find another way, he said quietly. He should have felt relief. Instead I felt the kind of dread that comes when pride and necessity stop being opposites and start becoming the same trap. Because if the money ran out before the truth came clear, I was no longer sure what would collapse first. The inn. Or me. The break in the case came from 3 different people who had no reason to be in the same room except me. That should have comforted me. Instead it felt like proof that my life had turned into a crime scene with a welcome mat. Nora and Luke arrived first, carrying coffee, a laptop, and the kind of grim focus that meant they had found something ugly. Luke dropped into a chair across from me in the breakfast room and turned the screen around. Deleted message logs. Spam interrogates. Draft attachments tied to the gossip hit and the anonymous fraud complaint. Mason used burner addresses, he said, tapping the screen, but he got lazy with the forwarding chain. Nora leaned in beside him and pointed to one line. These all looped through the same consulting shell but touched the zoning vendors. He stared at the names and routing patterns until the repetition became impossible to unsee. Sami Cell. Sami Structure. Sami Han. Not random attacks. A system. An hour later, Noah walked in carrying a yellowed invoice folder he had pulled from an old contractor archive across town. You need to see this. I set it on the table in front of me. The invoice was from a subcontractor used during one of Calloway's Boston data center expansions, dated only weeks before the original leak scandal. Sami vendor family. Sami routing manager now tied to the supply interference in Willow Bay. Noah looked at me carefully. I don't know corporate law, Clyde. But I know when the same hands keep showing up in different disasters. My throat tightened. Past and present were no longer echoes. They were fingerprints. Owen had been hovering in the doorway all morning with the expression of a man trying to decide whether confession would save anyone or only finish what guilt had started. At last he stepped into the room and held out a battered black flash drive. I kept this from the night everything fell apart, he said. I thought if I turned it over, they'd bury it. If I hid it, maybe one day it would matter. He stared at it in disbelief. Owen, he swallowed hard. I was scared no one would believe me. Especially Ethan. That name landed like a bruise. I plugged the drive into Lucas' laptop with shaking fingers. Inside was a screen capture archive from the night of the leak. Access logs before amendment. User flags before overwrite. Row sequences the polished version had never let me see. My breath caught. Owen's credentials were not primary in the first pass. They were inserted later. No one moved for a moment. Luke leaned closer to the screen. Nora covered her mouth. Noah muttered a low curse and stepped back. Owen just stood there like a man watching the shape of his own burial finally come loose from the ground. He did not move at all. I stared at the timeline and felt the lie lock into place with sickening clarity. Mason had not just attacked my inn. It had been building this war for years. My phone buzzed on the table. Ethan. I have enough to confront him now. He looked at the message, then at Owen's flash drive still glowing with the truth no one had wanted to see the first time. We were not chasing shadows anymore. We were standing on proof. The only question left was what Ethan would do once the man inside his own empire finally had nowhere left to hide. The next hit came dressed like proof. I was still in the breakfast room with Owen's flash drive, Lucas logs, and 3 legal pads full of timelines when Nora's face went wide over her phone. Claire, she said softly, don't panic before I show you this. He took the screen anyway. A clipped security video was already spreading across every local account that mattered. Me. Ethan. He's got my hand on his arm outside the Seaview 3 nights earlier, cut to look like a private, intimate meeting instead of an argument in the rain. Beneath it sat a freeze frame from the harbor hearing, Ethan looking at me across the room like I was the reason he had blown open his own company. The caption did the rest. Calloway compromised by ex-wife while waterfront deal collapses. He set the phone down before I crushed it. This was not gossip anymore. It was narrative engineering. Make me look manipulative. Make Ethan look weak. Turn fraud, sabotage, and corporate rot into a woman-shaped scandal people could understand more easily. The sponsor emails started coming almost immediately. One after another. Regretfully withdrawing from the Seaview reopening gala. Concern about public optics. Concern about financial entanglement. Concern about reputational instability. He almost laughed at that one. Reputation had become the clean little knife people used when they wanted to cut you without admitting they were afraid. Dana called 30 seconds later. Victoria and Adriana are feeding this, she said. The edits originated through a media contact tied to Vale Capital. Of course. They had not just attacked me. They had turned me into the excuse for Ethan's unraveling. The old story in a better dress. It chooses her, and everything burns. Then Ethan went silent. No text. No warning. No explanation. 6 hours passed with nothing but headlines and sponsor withdrawals and the steady humiliation of watching my name dragged. Through a version of events designed to make me small. He knew exactly what that silence felt like. History, repeating itself in a cleaner suit. Is choosing the easier story again, I said. My voice came out flatter than I felt. Nora grabbed my wrist. Or he's finally doing something ugly enough that he can't warn you first. He wanted to believe that. He did not. Not yet. Then Luke called. No greeting. No question. Turn on Harbor Finance Live. Right now. My pulse kicked hard enough to hurt. He grabbed the remote from the side table and turned on the television just as the camera steadied on a press podium in Boston, reporters packed shoulder to shoulder below it. Ethan stepped into frame. Dark suit. No Ismail. No Adrian. No board shield. Just the kind of stillness that only showed up on him when something had finally broken past repair. Whatever he was about to do, he was doing it alone. And for the first time all day, I stopped bracing for abandonment and started bracing for impact. The live feed shook once as another reporter pushed closer. Then Ethan reached the podium and the whole room seemed to sharpen around him. It did not open with denial. It did not ask for patience. It did not give the press the polished corporate language they had come expecting from a man like him. The media campaign targeting Claire Bennett is false, he said. It is edited, strategically distributed, and tied to the same network of vendor and consulting interference now under internal and external review. The room erupted before he could continue. Questions flew. Did he mean Vale Capital? Was this connected to Mason Reed? Had he compromised Calloway Development for a personal relationship with his ex-wife? Ethan did not step back. For once, he did not choose distance, ambiguity, or the safer version of the truth. He let the questions come, then answered the one that mattered. No decision I made regarding Claire Bennett should ever have been filtered through gossip, optics, or board convenience, he said. That happened once already. It will not happen again. He went completely still. Bing me, Nora swore softly. Luke stopped typing. Owen looked like he had forgotten how to breathe. Ethan kept going. He named the fraudulent media chain without hiding behind legal fog. He confirmed internal sabotage, misuse of vendor channels, and evidence contamination tied to prior internal actions now under renewed review. He announced cooperation with auditors, outside counsel, and regulators. And when a reporter asked whether Claire Bennett had manipulated his decisions on the waterfront project, Ethan answered without hesitation. No, he said. If anything, my failure was believing for too long that I could protect her by managing what she was allowed to know. The words landed like a strike to the chest. Not because they were romantic. Because they were true. And because he was saying them in public, where men like him usually preferred to bury anything that could cost them power. By the time the feed cut away from the podium, every message on my phone was coming in too fast to read. Dan. Nora's vendors. 2 sponsors who had just withdrawn and now wanted to revisit their position. 1 local board member suddenly calling the gala a vital act of community resilience. He should have felt vindicated. Instead I felt unsteady. Because the truth sounded very different when it stopped arriving in private and started detonating in public. That evening, Ethan came to the inn. Not with a legal team. Not with paperwork. Just himself. He met him in the lobby beneath the half-restored chandelier, the late light from the front windows striping the floor between us. You went public, I said. He held my eyes. I should have done it sooner. Yes. It took that without trying to soften it. For a moment neither of us moved. The inn around us smelled like fresh paint, sawdust, coffee, salt. Mine. Jaar de Arned. Is still at risk. The sponsors are coming back, he said. Not all of them. Enaug. He nodded once. Dana told me. A glanced toward the breakfast room, where legal pads and vendor samples still covered half the table. You're still rebuilding in the middle of all this. That's kind of the point. Something close to admiration crossed his face, but it was quieter now than it used to be. Les possessive. Les certain it had any right to exist. I meant what? He said today, he told me. He believed him. That was the dangerous part. Because belief had always come easier to me than safety. He crossed my arms. You do not get absolution because you finally chose the truth in front of cameras. I know. His voice stayed low and even. I didn't they do it for absolution. Then why? For the first time since Boston, he answered without reaching for strategy. Because I was tired of watching every version of my silence cost you something. The line hit and stayed. He hated that too. Maybe because part of me had waited too long to hear anything that simple. Maybe because he had learned how to say it only after the damage had become part of our architecture. Before I could answer, Dana walked in through the front door with 3 folders tucked under one arm and the expression she wore when good news came attached to more work. The inspectors moved up the final review, she said. If you want the reopening, Dubé got 48 hours to make this place pass everything. The air changed instantly. Business. Deadline. Survival. I looked from Dana to the folders in her arms, then to the half-finished rail, the revised plans, the long list of details still standing between me and opening those doors for real. 48 hours. After everything, it was going to come down to 48 hours and whether this battered old inn could stand one last test. He looked at Ethan. It was already looking at the work. Not at me. At the work. At the place. At what still had to be done. Then he said, tell me where you need another set of hands. And for the first time, the question did not sound like control. It sounded like a man asking to earn the right to stay in the room. Every choice felt smaller than I wanted and more precious because of it. You did it, Nora said when she stepped into the lobby and looked around. He shook my head. Not yet. That was the truth. The Seaview was breathing again, but I still did not trust the future enough to call it alive. The next few hours came together in pieces I was not supposed to notice. The missing table linens that suddenly arrived through a cancelled hospitality overstock. The harbor florist who quietly cut my invoice in half after a donor asked to stay anonymous. The electrician Noah recommended who refused extra payment and muttered something about a man in Boston covering the gap through 3 layers of distance. Ethan. Of course it was Ethan. Helping without putting his name on anything. Not buying gratitude. Not stepping in front of the story. Used holding up edges he had once helped tear open. That should have made it easier. Instead it made him harder to hate cleanly. By sunset, Noah came by with the final porch inspection notes and found me alone on the front steps, staring at the inn like it might still disappear if I blinked wrong. He sat beside me without crowding me and handed over the clipboard. You know, he said after a minute, you don't look scared of losing the inn anymore. He let out a tired breath. No, he nodded once, like he already knew the rest. You look scared of getting what you actually want. That landed too directly to dodge. I stared out at the water and said nothing. Noah rested his forearms on his knees and gave me the gentlest mercy I had seen from a man in a long time. Clyde, I like you, he said. But I'm not going to stand here and compete with a ghost you still answer when he speaks. My throat tightened. Noah, he shook his head, not bitter, just honest. I'm not angry. You just think safe isn't they what your heart is fighting with. After he left, the porch went quiet and the truth he had named stayed behind like weather. It was right. That was the problem. Noah was safe. Steady. Good. Back when I pictured a future beside him, my chest did not break open with fear. And apparently fear was still the closest thing I had to certainty. I stood there too long with the ocean turning dark in front of me and it then silence pressing at the edges of everything. It had stopped asking. Stopped reaching. Stopped trying to turn remorse into access. And somehow that patience had become more dangerous than pursuit ever was. Then my phone buzzed with a new town alert from code enforcement. Emergency inspection at Seaview Inn. Compliance issue filed less than 24 hours before reopening. He stared at the screen, pulse churning. Called all over again. One more hit. One more test. And this time, I knew exactly which name my heart would look for first. The inspector arrived at 4:17 de la tarde with a clipboard, a tight mouth, and the kind of timing that only exists when someone wants to ruin you on purpose. Emergency compliance review, he said, already stepping past me into the lobby while guests' welcome baskets still sat lined up on the front desk for Tomorrow's reopening. My pulse dropped hard when he pointed to the newly installed rear stair rail and the service hallway fire clearance. These measurements do not match the filed revision set, he said. If the discrepancy stands, I have to suspend occupancy approval. For 1 second, I could not move. Then I was moving too fast. He called Dana first. Noah second. By the time I reached for Ethan's name, my thumb hesitated only once. A answered on the first ring. Tell me what happened. Edith. 30 minutes later, he was at the inn. Not in a suit. Not with an attorney. In shirt sleeves, carrying printed revision packets, a flashlight, and the kind of focus that left no room for pride. Noah met him in the service hallway with a tape measure and a look that said this truce existed only because the inn mattered more than either of them. The next 8 hours blurred into urgency. Dana got the stamped revision trail from the town archive. Noah reworked the rear stair clearance. Ethan cross-checked every permit mark against the filed set and caught the discrepancy no one else had noticed fast enough. The compliance complaint had been filed against an older draft, not the approved revision. Deliberate. Of course it was. By midnight, the Seaview looked less like an inn and more like a battlefield lit by work lamps. Screw guns. Coffee cups. Paper sets spread across the breakfast room table. The whole place smelled like fresh cut wood, sawdust, wet coats, and the kind of exhaustion that makes honesty harder to avoid. At some point I found myself in the service hall beside Ethan, both of us bent over the corrected measurements while rain hit the back windows in soft, steady taps. You already filed the right set, he said. I know. His eyes lifted too. Meanie. Then somebody wanted the timing, not the truth. He let out one dry laugh. That seems to be a theme. I should have stepped back. I didn't. Neither did I. For a second, the whole house went still around us. Not because nothing was happening. Because too much was. I looked tired. Older somehow. Liz like the man who used to believe control could outrun consequence. I'm sorry, he said. Not dramatic. Not balanced. Just tired and true. He stared at him in the dim hall light and realized this was the first apology he had ever given me that did not ask to be useful. Before I could answer, Noah called from the lobby that the inspector would be back before dawn. So we kept going. By 4:11 de la mañana, the corrected hall was remeasured, the rear stair was recleared, and every packet on Dana's list sat lined up at the front desk in ruthless order. The inspector returned just before dawn. I walked the hallway. Measured the rail. Rechecked the filed set made us all wait too long while he looked over the final paperwork. Then, at last, he signed the occupancy clearance. My breath left me so fast I had to brace one hand against the counter. Ben May, the inn was quiet, finished, breathing. Ethan stood at my shoulder, close enough to feel, careful enough not to touch. He turned to him, exhausted, raw, and far too aware that somewhere between midnight and sunrise, we had stopped fighting each other and started fighting beside each other. I read it on my face before I could hide it. Clyde, he said, low and steady, this is how it should have been from the start. He looked at the signed approval in my hand, then at the man who had finally learned how to stand next to me without standing over me. For the first time, that thought did not feel impossible. It felt terrifyingly close. The reopening should have belonged entirely to me. That was the first thing that made me realize Ethan was about to do something dangerous. The Seaview was full by sunset. Candlelight in the lobby. Nostalgia's drifting out from the breakfast room. Guests moving through spaces I had rebuilt board by board, invoice by invoice, humiliation by humiliation. People kept stopping me to say the same thing in different words. Beautiful. Worth the wait. Jokers. Ismail thanked them, kept moving. Then I saw Ethan near the back of the room speaking quietly with Dana and Luke, not stepping into the center, not touching the spotlight, and my pulse shifted before I had any reason to trust it. After my welcome toast, he took the microphone. He froze so hard I felt it in my knees. He did not look at the donors first. Or the board. Or the press stringers lingering near the bar. He looked at me. Before this evening becomes anything else, he said, calm and devastatingly clear, everyone in this room should know that Seaview exists because Claire Bennett built it while people with more power than decency kept trying to break it. The room went silent. He kept going. He named the inn mine. The vision mine. The fight mine. It took none of the shine and left me nowhere to hide from what that kind of public truth does to a heart that still remembers being abandoned in public. Then his voice changed. Les palist. More real. I lost the best thing in my life the day I called fear responsibility and let a divorce stand in for courage. My breath caught. No one in the room moved. Glide, he said, and hearing my name in front of all those witnesses felt more intimate than privacy ever had. I am not asking for the past back. I already failed it. I am asking for the chance to build something honest enough to deserve a future. There it was. Not a clean apology. Not the grand billionaire gesture polished for applause. A wound opened on purpose in a room full of people who had once watched me be cut down. Then he stepped off the small platform and crossed the room toward me slowly, as if giving me every second to stop him. He held no power in his hands. No contract. No leverage. Used a small velvet ring box that he did not open right away. He stopped in front of me, close enough for me to see the sleep deprivation in his eyes, the tension he was carrying underneath all that control. You do not owe me forgiveness, he said quietly. You do not owe me belief. You do not owe me forever because I finally learned how badly. He wanted it. Then he opened the box. The ring inside was simple. Elegant. Nothing loud. Nothing calculated. He did not reach for my hand. He did not kneel. He only held the box where I could take it or leave it and said the one line that nearly broke me where I stood. I'm asking anyway. The whole room held its breath. He could not hear anything except my own pulse. He looked at the ring. Then at Ethan. Then at all the people who had watched me survive him, and now watched him stand in the ruin of his own pride asking for something he could not force, buy, or outmaneuver. Tears burned behind my eyes, sudden and unwelcome. Not because I did not feel him. Because I did. Too much. I reached out, not for the ring, but for the box itself, and closed it gently in his hand. A choice. Not an answer. His face did not fall. Somehow that hurt more. Ethan, I said, voice thin at first, then steadier. Forever is not something you beg for in one night. He laid the closed box back in his palm. It is something you live long enough to be trusted with. Then I stepped back, heart shaking hard enough to feel visible, and left him standing there with the ring, the room, and no answer at all. Back when I reached the doors of the Seaview and looked back once, I saw something I had never once seen in him before. It was not trying to win. It was trying to become worthy of losing without turning it into punishment. And somehow, that was the first thing that made me believe the story between us might not be over after all.